For 7 years, the rejected Omega lived alone in a forgotten forest, believing no one would ever come for her. Then, one freezing morning, 10 enormous white wolves surrounded her tiny cottage, and instead of attacking, they lowered their heads before her. Moments later, a giant alpha king stepped from the snow, his eyes fixed on the woman his kingdom had forgotten. He had not come to rescue her. He had come because his wolves had chosen her. And what he discovered about her past would shake his entire kingdom. For 7 years, Elara had lived where the kingdom ended and the maps became uncertain. Beyond the last watchtower of Frostfang, beyond the farms where chimney smoke rose into the winter sky, beyond the narrow roads used by hunters and woodcutters, there was a forest so old that even the oldest villagers spoke of it in lowered voices. They called it the Silent Wood. Elara simply called it home. Her cottage stood beneath a group of enormous pine trees, their branches bending beneath the weight of fresh snow. It was small enough that 3 long strides could take her from the wooden door to the cold stone fireplace. The roof leaked whenever the snow became heavy. The shutters no longer closed properly. One window had been repaired with a piece of oiled cloth. But it was hers. Every morning before sunrise, Elara woke to the sound of wind moving through the trees. She would wrap a faded grey cloak around her shoulders, place a kettle over the fire, and step outside with a basket hanging from her arm. The cold always greeted her first. It slipped beneath her sleeves and touched her fingers before she had gathered enough wood to warm them again. Still, she never complained. There was nobody to complain to. 7 years ago, she had learned that silence could hurt more than shouting. She had been 20 years old when the village alpha rejected her. Not privately. Not gently. In front of everyone. The ceremony had been held beneath the old oak tree while the entire pack watched. Elara still remembered the sound of the winter wind moving through the branches as the young alpha stepped away from her. He had looked at her as though she were something unfortunate he had discovered on his path. A weak Omega. A useless mate. A woman who would bring sickness and bad luck. Those words had traveled through the village faster than fire through dry grass. By sunset, Elara had packed what little she owned. Nobody stopped her. Nobody followed. She walked north until the houses disappeared. Then she kept walking. The forest became thicker. The snow became deeper. And eventually, the only footsteps beside hers belonged to her. 4 years, she survived by gathering herbs, trapping rabbits, drying mushrooms, and cutting fallen branches for firewood. She learned which roots could stop bleeding, which leaves could reduce fever, which berries would poison a person. She learned to read the clouds. She learned to sleep through wolves howling in the distance. And, most importantly, she learned not to expect anyone to come looking for her. Yet something had changed during the last few weeks. It began with footprints. Large footprints. Elara noticed them one morning beside her herb garden. She crouched in the snow and touched one with her gloved fingers. It was enormous. Far too large for any ordinary wolf. She followed the prints for several yards before they vanished beneath a wall of pine trees. The next morning, the prints returned. The day after that, she found a rabbit hanging from the wooden post beside her door. It had not been caught in one of her traps. There were no teeth marks. It had simply been placed there. Elara stared at it for a long moment. Then she looked toward the trees. Nothing moved. "Thank you," she whispered. She did not know why she said it. Perhaps because gratitude had become easier to give to animals than people. The next morning, the rabbit was gone. So was the piece of bread she had left on the doorstep. After that, the visitors came regularly. Sometimes she heard breathing beyond the trees. Sometimes she saw pale eyes between the trunks. Once, while gathering firewood, she turned and found a white wolf standing 20 paces away. It watched her. She watched it. Neither moved. Then the wolf slowly turned and disappeared. Elara did not follow. She had learned that wild things deserved the freedom to decide when they wanted to come closer. So she waited. And one morning, they did. The sun had barely risen when Elara stepped outside carrying a basket of dried herbs. She stopped. 10 wolves stood around her cottage. They were enormous. Their coats were white enough to disappear against the snow, except for their dark noses and watchful eyes. They were not growling. They were not baring their teeth. They simply stood there. 10 silent shapes in the winter morning. Elara's fingers tightened around the basket. Her heart began beating faster. She slowly stepped backward. The largest wolf moved forward. It was bigger than the others, with broad shoulders and a long scar running across one side of its muzzle. Elara expected it to attack. Instead, the wolf lowered its head. Slowly, almost carefully, its nose came close to her hand. Elara stopped breathing. Then she lowered her fingers. The wolf touched them. Warm breath spread across her cold knuckles. Something inside Elara broke open. Not fear. Something softer. Something she had forgotten existed. She knelt in the snow. The other 9 wolves remained perfectly still. Elara's eyes burned. You came back. A sound rolled through the trees. Not a howl. Footsteps. Heavy footsteps. Behind the wolves, a tall figure emerged from the snow. He wore a dark fur-lined cloak that reached almost to the ground. Snow rested across his shoulders. He was enormous. Not merely tall, but powerful in a way that made the forest seem smaller around him. His black hair was damp from the falling snow, and a silver crown rested against his brow. Elara slowly stood. The stranger stopped several yards away. The 10 wolves turned toward him. He looked at them. Then at her. And for the first time in 7 years, someone looked at Elara as though they had been searching for her. The man removed one glove. His voice was low enough to disappear beneath the wind. My wolves have never done this. Elara said nothing. His eyes moved over the cottage, the garden, the firewood stacked beside the wall. Then back to her. My name is Kaelen. He paused. I am the Alpha King of Frostfang. Elara looked at the 10 wolves surrounding her. Then at the king. And suddenly, she understood why the largest wolf had bowed. But she did not yet understand why a king had followed 10 wolves into a forest where even hunters feared to walk. Kaelen's warriors appeared nearly 20 minutes later. They came through the trees on horseback, wrapped in thick winter armor, carrying spears and bows. Every one of them looked exhausted. The horses snorted clouds of white breath. One rider dismounted and hurried toward Kaelen. My king, we have searched the eastern ridge. Kaelen raised one hand. The warrior stopped. His eyes moved toward the wolves. None of the animals had moved from Elara's side. That seemed to trouble him more than anything else. Kaelen turned toward Elara. For 3 days, those wolves have refused to return to the hunting party. Elara glanced at the largest wolf. The animal was watching her. Perhaps they found something they wanted. Kaelen's mouth almost curved into a smile. Perhaps. He stepped closer. Elara noticed the tiredness in his face. He was a king, but he did not look untouched by life. There were faint lines beside his eyes, a scar beneath his jaw, and something heavier behind his gaze. He looked toward the cottage. You live here alone? Yes. For how long? 7 years. Kaelen's expression changed. Only slightly, but Elara noticed. 7 years. She nodded. He looked around the forest again. The broken fence. The tiny garden. The stack of firewood. The old boots beside the door. Everything a person could see when looking at a life built without help. You should come to the castle. Elara almost laughed. It was a quiet sound. Not amused. Just tired. I have no place in a castle. Everyone has a place somewhere. That is not what I learned. Kaelen's eyes settled on her. For a moment, the forest seemed to disappear. There was only the sound of snow falling between them. Then he said, I did not come here to judge you. Why did you come? His gaze moved toward the wolves. I followed them. That answer should have frightened her. Instead, it made her curious. The wolves had been coming to her for weeks. Why? She did not know. But perhaps the king did. Before Elara could ask, one of the wolves suddenly limped. Its rear leg shook. Elara immediately crouched. The animal backed away. She waited. Then she extended her hand. The wolf slowly approached. She examined its paw. A thorn was buried between its pads. Elara carefully removed it. The wolf did not move. Kaelen watched silently. When she finished, the animal placed its paw on the snow and walked normally again. "How did you know?" Kaelen asked. Elara looked up. "Because it hurt." Kaelen stared at her. The answer seemed to reach somewhere inside him. That afternoon, Elara discovered that the wolves were not the only creatures in trouble. A second wolf was breathing too quickly. A third had a dullness in its eyes. Elara touched the fur beneath its jaw. "How long?" Kaelen's brow tightened. "How long what? Have they been sick?" His silence was enough. "Months," he finally said. Elara stood. "Why didn't your healers help them?" "They tried. Then they treated the wrong thing." The king's warriors exchanged glances. Elara walked toward her herb shelves. She filled a cloth pouch with dried roots and leaves. "This will lower the fever." Kaelen watched her hands. "You are a healer." "No." She tied the pouch. "I am someone who learned because nobody else was there." The words were simple. But Kaelen looked away. That evening, he asked her to come to Frostfang Castle. Elara refused. He offered horses. She refused. Food. She refused. Protection. She refused that too. Finally, Kaelen said nothing. He simply ordered his men to make camp. The wolves settled around Elara's cottage. Some slept beneath the trees. Two curled near the door. The largest lay directly across the path. Elara stood in the doorway watching them. For the first time in years, her home did not feel empty. The next morning, Kaelen found her packing herbs. "You changed your mind." "No." She looked toward the wolves. "They need treatment." Kaelen nodded. "So you will come." "I will help the wolves." He understood the difference. They began the journey south before noon. 4 hours, they traveled through snow-covered valleys. Kaelen rode beside Elara rather than ahead of her. The 10 wolves moved through the forest around them. Then, just before sunset, the largest wolf stopped. Its head lifted. Its ears turned toward the distant mountains. A low growl rolled through its chest. Elara stopped too. Kaelen looked at the animal. "What is it?" The wolf stared north. Toward the mountains. Toward the village Elara had left 7 years earlier. And something cold moved through her. Because the wolves had never looked that way before. They were not afraid. They were warning them. Frostfang Castle appeared 3 days later. It rose from a rocky hill above a frozen river, its towers cutting into the pale winter sky. Dark stone walls surrounded the kingdom's heart. Silver banners bearing the image of a white wolf moved in the wind. Below the castle, villagers crossed narrow streets carrying baskets of bread, firewood, and wintergrain. Smoke rose from hundreds of chimneys. Children ran through the snow. Dogs barked. Horses pulled wooden carts. The kingdom was alive. Yet when Elara entered through the gates, conversations became quieter. People stared. Not because they knew her. Because they saw the 10 wolves. The animals walked behind her like silent guardians. Kaelen noticed every glance. He said nothing. Inside the castle, the air smelled of pine smoke, roasted meat, herbs, and warm bread. Servants hurried through stone corridors. Guards stood beneath enormous wolf carvings. Elara felt smaller with every step. She had lived 7 years in a cottage where the loudest sound was wind. Now hundreds of footsteps echoed around her. A woman named Mara, the castle's elderly healer, met her near the royal kennels. Her eyes were sharp. Her hands were steady. She looked at Elara's worn cloak. Then at the wolves. Then back at Elara. "You are the forest healer." Elara nodded. Mara's face softened. "Then perhaps the forest has finally sent us what we need." The royal wolves were worse than Elara expected. Some had lost weight. Others refused food. Their coats had become dull. Elara moved from one enclosure to another, touching noses, examining eyes, smelling water bowls, studying scraps of food. The royal healers watched with offended expressions. Elara ignored them. She noticed something strange. The sick wolves were not suffering from the same illness. Some had fever. Some had weakness. Others had trembling muscles. But all of them had one thing in common. They drank from the same wells. Elara crouched beside a water trough. She dipped her fingers into it. Nothing looked unusual. But when she lifted her hand, a faint bitter smell clung to her skin. She looked toward Kaelen. Where does this water come from? The Eastern Spring. Who tends it? The kennel master. Who oversees him? Kaelen's expression hardened. Lord Varrek. The name changed the atmosphere. Varrek entered the courtyard moments later. He was a handsome man with silver at his temples and a smile that never reached his eyes. He bowed. My king. Then he looked at Elara. The smile disappeared. So this is the woman who has interrupted your journey. Elara said nothing. Kaelen's voice became cold. She is here to heal the wolves. Varrek looked toward the animals. Royal healers have failed where she will succeed. Elara noticed his fingers. He wore black gloves. Even indoors. His right hand was clenched. She remembered the wolves growling at the mountains. She remembered the bitter smell in the water. Something about Varrek made the back of her neck tighten. But she had no proof. That night, she treated 3 wolves. One of them ate for the first time in weeks. A stable boy cried when he saw it. Elara smiled. Give him small portions. The boy nodded. Word spread through the castle. The forest woman had helped a dying wolf. Then another. And another. Kaelen began visiting the kennels each evening. Sometimes he stood silently while Elara worked. Sometimes they spoke about the kingdom. He told her that Frostfang had once been peaceful. That wolves and humans had lived together for generations. That the 10 guardian wolves were believed to descend from an ancient bloodline. Elara listened. Do people still believe the old stories? Kaelen looked at the wolves. People believe what they fear. And what do you believe? He looked at her. I believe some stories survive because they are true. Elara did not know what to say. But someone else was listening. Varrek stood beyond the doorway. His expression was no longer amused. He had found an old record in the royal library. A record written hundreds of years earlier. It spoke of 10 guardian wolves appearing only when Frostfang was threatened. And it contained one line that made Varrek's blood run cold. The wolves would kneel only before the one whose compassion carried the ancient bloodline's trust. Varrek closed the book. If Elara was that person, his plan was in danger. So he decided she would not live long enough to prove it. The next morning, one of the royal wolves collapsed. A servant screamed. Elara ran into the kennel. Kaelen followed. The wolf lay trembling beside an overturned bowl. Beside it was a small pouch of crushed herbs. Elara recognized them instantly. They were poisonous. And the pouch had been placed beside her own medical supplies. Before she could speak, Varrek entered with guards. His eyes fell upon the pouch. Then upon Elara. Search her room. The guards moved. Elara stared at Kaelen. For the first time since arriving at Frostfang, she saw doubt in the king's eyes. And the woman who had spent 7 years learning to survive alone suddenly feared that she was about to lose the first place that had begun to feel like home. The accusation spread through Frostfang before sunset. Elara had poisoned the wolves. Some servants refused to look at her. The royal healers whispered behind closed doors. Soldiers stood outside her chamber. The same people who had watched her heal the animals now spoke of punishment. Elara sat beside the window while snow struck the glass. She did not cry. She had cried enough 7 years ago. Instead, she opened the cloth pouch containing her herbs and began examining every leaf. Kaelen entered alone. He closed the door. For several moments, neither spoke. Finally, he placed the poisoned herbs on the table. These were found among your supplies. Elara looked at him. Did you believe I would poison an animal I spent 3 days trying to save? No. The answer came immediately. She studied his face. Then why am I still here? Because I need proof. Elara nodded. It hurt more than she expected. Not because he doubted her. Because she had begun hoping he would not. Kaelen stepped closer. I will find it. You should. She turned back toward the window. I have spent 7 years being blamed for things I did not do. I will not beg again. Kaelen's expression tightened. He left. Elara waited until the corridor became quiet. Then she opened the window. Cold air rushed into the room. She climbed down onto the narrow stone ledge. The castle guards did not notice. She moved toward the kennels. There was something she needed to see. Beneath the water troughs, she found a thin layer of blackened roots. They had been buried beneath the soil. She touched one. The bitter smell returned. Not poison. Something worse. A substance that weakened wolves slowly. Something designed to make an illness look natural. Elara's heartbeat quickened. She pulled one root free. Footsteps sounded behind her. She turned. Kaelen stood in the doorway. He saw the roots in her hand. His face changed. You found it. Elara nodded. Someone has been poisoning them. How long? Years. The king's jaw tightened. Then the alarm bells rang. Once. Twice. Then again. A scream rose from the lower village. Kaelen ran. Elara followed. Outside, snow had become a wall. A violent storm had descended over Frostfang. The royal kennels stood open. Several infected wolves had escaped. They were frightened, sick, and confused. People were running through the streets. Children screamed. A horse broke free from a cart. Elara saw a little boy trapped beneath it. She did not think. She ran. Kaelen shouted her name. She reached the boy as the horse kicked wildly. She crawled beneath the cart. The child was crying so hard he could barely breathe. Look at me. His eyes found hers. Don't close them. Elara pushed the boy toward the opening. A wolf lunged nearby. Kaelen struck the ground beside it with his sword, forcing it away. Elara! She pulled the child free. Then another scream came from the kennels. One of the 10 white wolves had collapsed. Elara ran back. The wolf was lying in the snow. Its white coat was stained red. She dropped to her knees. No! The animal's breathing was shallow. Elara pressed both hands against its chest. The other 9 wolves gathered around them. Kaelen stood several steps away. The storm roared around the castle. Elara's hands shook. Stay. The wolf's eyes opened. For one moment, it looked directly into hers. Then beneath its fur, something began to glow. A silver mark appeared along its chest. An ancient crescent. Elara froze. The wolf breathed once. Twice. Then its body relaxed. It was alive. Kaelen stepped forward. His face had gone pale. Mara appeared behind him carrying an ancient book. She opened it with trembling hands. Her eyes moved from the page to the wolf. Then to Elara. The guardian mark. Kaelen looked at her. What does it mean? Mara swallowed. It means the old stories were never about strength. She looked at Elara. They were about her. Lightning flashed above the castle. And somewhere inside the fortress, Lord Varrek realized his secret had just begun to die. By morning, Varrek moved. The storm had covered the kingdom in white, but inside Frostfang Castle, something darker was spreading. He gathered soldiers in the great hall. Kaelen arrived moments later. The king stood at the top of the stone steps. Varrek faced him. The kingdom cannot be ruled by weakness. Kaelen's expression did not change. You poisoned my wolves. Varrek smiled. You have no proof. Mara stepped forward with the ancient book. The mark has appeared. Every face in the hall turned toward the white wolf beside Elara. The silver crescent glowed faintly beneath its fur. Varrek's mask finally cracked. That creature proves nothing. But the room had already changed. People were beginning to understand. Kaelen looked at his soldiers. Then at Elara. Then at Varrek. I will not execute her. Varrek's voice rose. Then you will lose the kingdom. He had prepared for this. Several guards drew their weapons. Others hesitated. For a terrible moment, Frostfang divided itself in two. Kaelen's loyal warriors stood on one side. Varrek's men stood on the other. Nobody moved. Then Varrek gave the order. The castle gates slammed shut. Kaelen's soldiers were disarmed. The king was forced to surrender his sword. Elara watched him do it. He could have fought. He did not. Because servants were standing behind Varrek. Because villagers were trapped outside. Because one wrong move could turn the castle into a slaughterhouse. Varrek looked at Elara. Take her. 2 guards seized her arms. Kaelen stepped forward. The 10 wolves growled. Varrek laughed. Let them growl. Elara looked at Kaelen. For the first time, she saw fear in his eyes. Not fear for himself. For her. She was taken to a locked chamber beneath the castle. But Varrek had made one mistake. He thought Elara's strength came from the wolves. He did not understand. The wolves followed her because of who she already was. Kindness had not made her weak. It had taught her how to endure. While Varrek prepared his final demand, Elara spoke quietly to the servants who brought her food. She remembered their names. She asked about their families. She noticed the injured stable boy's hand. She tore a strip from her cloak and wrapped it around his wound. She comforted the kitchen girl who was crying. She did not tell them to fight. She simply reminded them that they were not powerless. Word traveled. A baker refused to open the gates for Varrek's soldiers. Then 3 stable hands joined him. Then 6 guards lowered their weapons. Then villagers began gathering outside the castle walls. Varrek's control began cracking. Meanwhile, Kaelen escaped through an old passage beneath the northern tower. He found his loyal warriors beyond the frozen river. The 10 wolves followed. They crossed the mountain pass through the night. Snow struck their faces. Kaelen walked instead of riding. His soldiers followed him. He had never felt the weight of a crown as heavily as he did that night. Not because he might lose it. Because Elara might die. At dawn, they reached the castle. The 10 wolves stopped at the gate. The largest lifted its head. Then it ran. Kaelen followed. Inside the fortress, Elara had discovered the final truth. The black roots beneath the kennels were not the entire plan. Behind a stone wall was a hidden chamber. Inside were barrels of the poisonous mixture. Records. Names. Dates. Proof that Varrek had been poisoning the wolves for years. He wanted the animals to become weak. He wanted fear to spread. He wanted the kingdom to believe Kaelen could no longer protect them. Then he would take the crown. Elara found the records. But before she could escape, the door slammed shut. Varrek stood behind her. You should have stayed in your forest. Elara turned. For 7 years, she had heard those words in different forms. Weak. Useless. Unwanted. Not enough. She looked at him. And this time, she did not lower her eyes. You should have learned what the forest teaches. Varrek stepped closer. What is that? Elara looked toward the barred door. That winter never lasts forever. The castle gates exploded open. The wolves had arrived. The sound shook the fortress. Wood splintered. Guards shouted. Heavy footsteps thundered across the stone courtyard. Then came the wolves. 10 enormous white shapes burst through the smoke and snow. They moved with terrifying speed. Not attacking blindly. Not hunting people. Searching. Looking for one person. Elara. Kaelen entered behind them. His sword was in his hand. His face was streaked with snow and blood. Their eyes met across the courtyard. For one breath, neither moved. Then Elara smiled. It was small. Almost hidden. But Kaelen saw it. Varrek did too. The villain stepped backward. You would destroy your kingdom for her. Kaelen's voice was quiet. No. He looked around at the servants, villagers, soldiers, and wolves. I would save it from you. Varrek attacked. The battle was brief but violent. Steel struck steel. Men shouted. The wolves moved around the edges of the fight, protecting the wounded rather than tearing through the soldiers. Kaelen drove Varrek backward. But Varrek reached for a hidden blade. Elara saw it. Kaelen. He turned. The blade came down. The largest wolf lunged. Its body struck Varrek's arm. The weapon fell. Kaelen disarmed him. Varrek crashed against the stone floor. Silence spread through the hall. Mara stepped forward with the records. One by one, the evidence was read. Names, dates, orders, payments. Every poisoned well. Every sick wolf. Every lie. The truth became impossible to deny. The soldiers who had followed Varrek lowered their heads. Some removed their weapons. Others stepped away from him. Varrek looked around the hall. Nobody came to save him. The man who had spent years creating fear finally stood alone. Just as Elara had once stood alone. But there was one difference. Elara had chosen kindness. Varrek had chosen cruelty. And now their paths had reached their end. Kaelen ordered Varrek imprisoned until the kingdom's law could judge him. Then he turned toward Elara. The entire hall watched. For a moment, she expected something grand. A declaration. A crown. A public claim. Instead, Kaelen walked toward her and stopped several feet away. "You are free," he said. Elara's eyes softened. "You were never my prisoner." "I know." His voice became quieter. "But you should never again feel that you owe this kingdom your life." Elara looked around. At Mara. At the stable boy. At the servants. At the villagers. At the 10 wolves. Then she looked at the king. "I don't." She took a breath. "I want to stay." Kaelen's expression changed. "Why?" Elara looked toward the windows. Snow was beginning to fall again. "Because for the first time, I'm choosing where I belong." Months passed. The wolves recovered. The poisoned wells were cleansed. The royal kennels were rebuilt. Varrek's name became a warning whispered to children who asked why trust mattered. But something else changed too. Frostfang became quieter. Kinder. The king opened the castle gates more often. The villagers began visiting the wolf sanctuary. And Elara refused every title offered to her. She did not want to be called princess. She did not want jewels. She wanted a place where injured animals could sleep safely. So she asked Kaelen for something else. Her old cottage. He thought she wanted to return alone. She did not. That spring, Elara walked north with Kaelen. The 10 wolves traveled beside them. The snow had begun melting from the pine branches. Small streams appeared between the rocks. The forest smelled of wet earth. When they reached the cottage, Elara stopped. The roof was still crooked. The shutters still needed repair. The garden was buried beneath winter debris. She smiled. Kaelen looked at her. "This is home." Elara touched the old wooden door. It was. She glanced toward him. "Now it can become something better." The wolves spread through the clearing. One lay beneath the pine tree. Another sniffed the garden. The largest approached Elara. She knelt. Its nose touched her hand. The silver mark beneath its fur glowed faintly in the morning light. Kaelen stood behind her. He did not interrupt. He understood now. The wolves had never brought him to the forest to find a healer. They had brought him to find someone the kingdom had failed to recognize. A woman who had survived rejection without becoming cruel. A woman who had lived alone without forgetting how to care. A woman who had every reason to hate the world and still chose to heal what was wounded. Elara stood. The wind moved through the pines. Far away, another wolf howled. The 10 guardians answered. Then Kaelen's voice came softly beside her. "Do you still feel alone?" Elara looked at the wolves. At the cottage. At the king. At the forest that had once been her hiding place. She shook her head. "No." The answer carried through the trees. That evening, a small fire burned inside the cottage. Bread warmed beside the flames. Herbs hung from the ceiling. Kaelen sat near the doorway while the wolves rested outside beneath the stars. Elara watched the fire. 7 years earlier, she had walked into this forest believing she had been abandoned by the world. She had been wrong. The world had simply taken a very long time to find her. Outside, the 10 wolves lifted their heads. Their howls rose together beneath the moon. Not a warning. Not a cry of loneliness. A call. A promise. And for the first time in 7 years, Elara heard the sound of a pack calling her home.